Barack Obama scrambled a press conference to discuss housing initiatives to mostly benefit veterans. But the question and answer session that followed focused on Iran, Israel, and the Middle East, where the president appeared to tout U.S. sanctions.
What we've been able to do over the last 3 years is mobilize unprecedented, crippling sanctions on Iran. Iran is feeling the bite of these sanctions in a substantial way.
The U.S. president said there is still an opportunity for diplomacy with Iran over its nuclear energy program, but withheld details.
It is my belief that we have a window of opportunity where this can still be resolved diplomatically. That's not just my view. That's the view of our top intelligence officials.
U.S. diplomacy with Iran is one of the biggest topics of discussion in the country, as members of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, lobby Congress at the same time Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu beats the war drum against Iran. Call it a coincidence or not, the president's first press conference of the year coincides with Republican rivals' biggest day of the year when rallying for delegates across the country, Super Tuesday, where they try to get the most votes in primary elections. There's been strong war rhetoric coming from most conservatives in dealing with Iran. The president has expressed concerns with what he says is casualness and dialogue with going to war. Experts say that President Obama may be in a difficult position, but is lacking effective leadership in dealing with Middle East uncertainty and potential war with Iran.
Because the price that would have to be paid by the Israelis and the United States would be too great in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in terms of oil, and in terms of general Middle East stability. And that's
why haven't we seen this, though? Why haven't we seen this from the president?
Well, because Obama is he is a weakling.
The Obama administration reaffirms its alliance with Israel constantly, but recent polls show that a majority of Israelis don't want a war with Iran, a sentiment also echoed by many Americans, but it often depends on what's politically at stake.
It just shows you how far gone American politics is, right? How corrupt and how treacherous.
Experts say U.S. strategy could become trickier as the deadline for the general election looms. President Obama could be in a compromising position for re-election if backing up Israel is used as leverage. Colin Campbell, Press TV, Washington.
It is 40th birthday of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani neuroscientist known as Daughter of the Nation. Her birthday anniversary is a grim reminder of a verdict by a New York court which in 2010 sentenced her on the charges of attempted murder of American soldiers during her detention in an Afghan prison in 2008.
It's just cover-ups, and cover-ups get messy. What a big mockery of justice this was. It's just too obvious now, I think. It seems ridiculous even commenting on it. It's just hilariously ridiculous.
The continued protest for her support has increased anti-American sentiments in Pakistan. The fresh wave of protests has once again compelled the reluctant government to write a formal letter to Washington requesting her repatriation under the UN Convention for Repatriation of Prisoners on Humanitarian Grounds. However, Islamabad has yet to sign this convention.
I'm not going to believe on their words anymore because they have always been deceiving. All the time we hear promises. For years and years we hear promises, and in the end there is nothing, no development, no change, no solid progress. So why should I believe?
Political observers here point out that the so-called war on terror is hugely dependent on Pakistan's cooperation, and this gives government a lot of leverage to toughly negotiate with Washington on repatriating Dr. Afia Siddiqui. Nonetheless, the track record of the government suggests that it is unlikely to go beyond paying a lip service to the public demand to secure her release from U.S. custody. The U.S. has portrayed Dr. Afia as a terrorist linked with Al-Qaeda, but failed to come up with the strong evidence during her 9 years long captivity. Right activists say the failure to prove her links with Al-Qaeda has led Americans to fabricate false evidence of her attempt to kill US soldiers. Pakistan's secret intelligence agencies allegedly kidnapped Dr. Afia from her home along with her children from Karachi in 2003 and later handed them over to the US. Javed Rana, Press TV, Islamabad.
On a rare occasion, Bulgaria's Prime Minister allowed media to record the otherwise closed-door meeting of his government. He had something important to announce, a political reshuffle.
Half of them were fired. The other half returned their money. These are heads of state agencies, regional governors, MPs, deputy ministers. But I call upon the previous government to return their bonuses too. They were lying there was no crisis and became millionaires. But let me remind them that due to mismanagement of the crisis, Ireland's former premier is now being investigated by a prosecutor.
These sharp remarks were in response to a huge political scandal in Bulgaria after it was revealed that in times when all salaries and pensions were frozen and yet another round of austerity measures is expected, political officials have actually allocated among themselves some lavish bonuses of hundreds of thousands of euro. The premier swore this was happening behind his back and gave his ministers and their teams an ultimatum: return the money or hit the road.
A minimum of 7-8 million euros can be returned to the state budget, as members of the previous cabinet were affiliated with private companies too. So if they want to judge us, first they have to transfer their money to the bank account we have opened and announce for which children it will be spent.
This after a shocking revelation that at the end of 2011 there was not enough money for treatment of diseased children, but there was enough for political bonuses. Due to such cases, Bulgaria is under unprecedented supervision by the EU Commission, and Transparency International has rated it the most corrupt country in EU.
No doubt, Transparency has put it right. The corruption index in Bulgaria is still very high, together with other countries, and is the lowest. Bulgaria is still the poorest country of the European Union, no doubt. The rule of law and the reform of the judicial system is still probably the biggest challenge that you have.
Due to such rule of law, the president of his home country, Germany, recently resigned over allegations of corruption, not even proven facts. In the same time, the premiers and presidents of Greece and Italy have announced they are working without salaries, out of solidarity with their financially troubled countrymen. In Bulgaria, however, the situation is different, and observers describe it as a classical case of double morality. The European Commission and citizens alike urge stronger counteractions to fight state fraud and high-level corruption in Bulgaria. With just 1 year to go before crucial parliamentary elections, Prime Minister Boyko Borisov is striving for a second term, while the opposition is calling for the ouster of the conservative government. Ivailo Spasov, Press TV, Sofia.
Anti-Israeli sentiments are on the rise in Egypt's capital, Cairo, since former President Hosni Mubarak was deposed last year. The gas pipeline near Egypt's Al Arish to Israel has been sabotaged several times in protest against Egypt's economic ties with Israel. The reappointment of Israel's new envoy back to Cairo after people attacked the embassy last November has also angered many Egyptians. The anti-Israeli sentiment is growing further as Sameh Fahmy, the former Minister of Petroleum, and Hussein Salem, the fugitive tycoon, stand trial for working against the country's interests by exporting gas to Israel way below market prices.
Concerning the anti-Israeli sentiments in Egypt, it's common. We know that the stereotype of Israel is very negative for the Egyptian ordinary people. And it's common to see actions against the Israeli embassy or something like that. We are suffering from insecurity along the pipes of the gas, and also we have in Egypt great negative feelings concerning the story of gas, because we have Egyptians against supplying Israel with natural gas.
Today there is no secure embassy building that exists for Israel in the Egyptian capital, and the new appointed envoy Yacoub Amitié will temporarily operate from his residence, which angers numerous Egyptians. An opinion poll commissioned by Press TV and conducted by Major Polling Institute last year showed most Egyptians are against their country's ties with Israel.
This is like a drama. This is something that's coming from Israel themselves. They like to do this. They like to prove to all the world, the United Nations, Egypt, they couldn't control Sinai.
The Arab League, in its statement, said Israel bears full responsibility for what it said were crimes committed against Egypt.
I totally reject and refuse the principle itself of Egypt being subsidizing any other country, not to mention Israel, in specific. I guess, you know, we deserve to be subsidized rather than any other people.
Egypt's new regime has been bombarded by international tensions and anti-Israeli sentiments and security concerns. Only another attack was reported by the state media on Monday on the gas pipeline to Israel, situated in the west town of El Arish in the northern part of Sinai, sending plumes of smoke high into the air. So far, no documentation has been provided surrounding the current investigations on the frequent attacks on the gas pipeline. Sarim Jadidi, Press TV, Cairo.
While official figures say that Italians earn on average 29,000 euros a year, the real figure most likely is 23,000 euros when taking into account the black labor market. This implies that many employees earn less than 1,000 euros a month. However, there is a small number of Italians whose wage levels have always been quite high compared to the rest of the country: the members of parliament. According to a study by reputable magazine L'Espresso, Italy's 315 senators' yearly salary is 6.8 times higher than average Italians, while the 630 members of the Chamber of Deputies are paid 6.5 times more. Politicians in Italy make 12,000 to 15,000 euro monthly, which is more than quite a number of Italians take home in a year.
It is true, our parliamentary allowances are a bit disproportionate. Yes, I'd like to call them allowances rather than wages, because I don't consider them as part of my income.
Italy's MPs' salaries are much higher compared to their European counterparts. In France, lawmakers' wages are 4.8 times higher than those of the average citizen. In Germany, 3.4. In Spain, 2.1.
Let me be frank with you. My wage is 5,000 euros monthly. There are other senators who earn more because they improperly get the allowances destined to their assistants. And on the top of that, we can claim daily expenses, phone bills.
Prime Minister Mario Monti asked the Italian members of parliament to take a salary cut as part of a broader effort to trim the privileges of the country's political elite.
What is relevant is that we cut our wages by 25-30% in the last 3 years, and that we are still much below what some important functionaries of the public administration take, and we are trying to put a limit also to that. By the way, we are about to pass for the second time a reduction of the number of the MPs.
Recently, Italy's Senate Constitutional Affairs Commission has approved the immediate reduction of public managers' salaries. Some of them receive conspicuous pay. The current head of the police, for example, is on 621,000 euro a year. Beyond wage reductions, a real culture change is required in Italy, whereby public institutions are not used as means of personal wealth gain, but as promoters and guarantors of public interests. Max Civili, Press TV, Rome.
U.S. authorities have given the green light to kill American citizens abroad who are suspected of terrorism, according to U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. In a speech on Monday to law students, the U.S.'s top attorney said that U.S. citizenship alone and a citizen's right to due process in a court of law are not enough to protect citizens suspected of terrorism.
It's clear that United States citizenship alone does not make such individuals immune from being targeted. But it does mean that the government must take into account all relevant constitutional considerations with respect to United States citizens, even those who are leading efforts to kill innocent Americans. And of these, the most relevant is the Fifth Amendment's due process clause.
Holder went on to propose that due process is not the same thing as judicial process, a statement that stunned law scholars and students who had always equated the two terms. To find out what kind of legal sense the Attorney General's speech made, we spoke with a man who's made a long career out of speaking truth to power, noted civil libertarian and defense attorney Ron Kuby. Kuby, who was familiar with Holder's speech, told Press TV that contrary to the Attorney General's feelings, there's no difference between due process and judicial process whatsoever.
But this distinction that Holder articulated doesn't exist in the law. He cited no legal authority for it. And as far as I know, there is no legal authority. Holder's speech surprised everyone in the civil liberties community because it was more of a public relations speech than it was a legal analysis.
It was in September of last year that an American drone strike killed American-born Islamic cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who had been on a U.S. list of terror suspects to be done away with. The Obama administration had been relatively quiet about the legal justification for the killing until Monday, when Holder held that when the U.S. can't capture terror suspects, it must use deadly measures.
But we must also recognize that there are instances where our government has the clear authority, and I would argue the responsibility, to defend the United States through the appropriate and lawful use of lethal force.
Kuby says that the U.S. government probably has some legal recourse for the killing of U.S. citizens without due process of law. It simply hasn't been articulated. He says that there may be some precedent set about 150 years ago in the U.S. Civil War, but he admits that's a long way to go for case law. Kuby also points out Obama and Holder's records as legal scholars, saying they should be better able to explain themselves.
I just think that if he's so insistent upon being right about this and insisting that it's legal, he should explain why. That's all. And so far he hasn't, except this sort of ridiculous speech that was very short on law and very long on bluster.
He adds that secret documents that can't be revealed but allegedly give the right to kill American citizens is not good law procedure. Holder did not say anything on Monday about the legality or lack thereof of drone attacks that have killed hundreds of civilians in Pakistan and the U.S. drone spying program exposed by Iran late last year. Hank Flynn, Press TV, New York.
Having a fragile economy that keeps taking 5 steps front and 10 steps back was not something the people of South Sudan expected when they voted for independence more than a year ago. Yet the economy of the world's newest country is facing just that, in light of the country's halt to the production of petrol, which dominates 98% of the country's income, despite the government trying to assure its civilians that the halt of petrol production will not have any negative impact on the country's economy.
The halt in petrol production will be negative. There will be difficulties, but the government is very careful that services to the South Sudanese citizens will continue and will not stop.
The government's views on the economy, however, did not match that of the traders in the market, who are living the downturns of inflation, lack of goods due to border blockade, and high taxes to bring in goods from South Sudan's East African neighbors. Tawfiq Abdullah, a northern trader in South Sudan, explains.
All the goods come through Uganda, from Uganda or from Dubai through Mombasa. Sometimes the market runs out of goods. If the problems in the border between Sudan and South Sudan ends, the goods are brought to the market and there will be a decrease in the prices.
And although some thought that the once united country becoming two and the disputed border between them being blocked or unsafe might have something to do with it, analysts had a different reading, which in the end told of the catastrophe the economy of South Sudan could be facing.
It will have repercussions, some impact, but they can be addressed by the government if they are able to come up with some concrete austerity measures to address basically the government expenditure, because that would be the target of the austerity measures, to reduce the expenditure on the part of the government. And also this will make the government to work harder in order to improve the collection of non-oil revenues.
Yet whatever people see, the fact remains that South Sudan has to make a move to save its economy from dying. It seems that South Sudan needs to take more than just austerity measures to ensure that its citizens do not drop further below the poverty level, which more than 60% of the population is already living in, or it could face more than just an economic crisis in a volatile country. Heba Morgan, Press TV, Juba, South Sudan.
Several factories have closed down in Gaza, following weeks of power cuts and fuel shortages, due to years of Israeli blockade. According to the head of Federation of Industries and Palestinian Businessmen Association, the crisis has seriously affected about 3,900 industrial establishments and factories in the seaside territory.
In light of the power cuts, factories now rely on diesel, but this substance is not available. We urge both governments in Gaza and the West Bank to do what they can to provide the needed fuel to avert an impending catastrophe for local industry.
Days ago, Gaza's only power plant shut down completely after fuel deliveries coming from Egypt through tunnels under the border came to a halt. This left Gazans with no other means but electrical generators, which have further complicated the struggle for fuel. Meanwhile, fuel shortages have disrupted transportation in Gaza, forcing drivers to wait in long queues. Hundreds of factories like this one will be forced to shut down within days due to lack of fuel. This will badly affect the local industry.
The factory closed down 2 weeks ago, and we cannot find diesel. Our employees are not working now. We have been asking here and there for fuel, but we couldn't find any. This will cost us a lot of losses.
The power and fuel crisis has caused frustration among people who have called on all concerned parties, including the Egyptian side, to intervene immediately and solve this problem. Yusuf Al-Halo, Press TV, Gaza.
In Beijing, delegations from America and North Korea met to finalize details of a food aid deal reached after Pyongyang agreed to halt nuclear activities and allow United Nations inspectors to return. Before heading to the North Korean embassy, America's principal negotiator, Special Envoy Robert King, said his job was to agree on procedures to ensure the food went to the most needy.
The Food Nutrition Assistance Program that we're here to talk about is a complicated program, and we need to work out the details in terms of how we're going to carry that program out. We're looking at a program that will help 1 million or more residents of the DPRK.
North Korea has suffered from chronic food shortages since a famine in the 1990s and relies on outside aid to feed its people. America suspended food aid in 2009 because of disagreements over transparency and monitoring. According to US officials, the 240,000 tons of food to be donated are intended for children and pregnant women.
Under the terms of the deal, which was announced late last month, North Korea agreed to suspend uranium enrichment, as well as nuclear and long-range missile tests, and to allow international monitors of its nuclear program back in.
Coming so soon after the former Supreme Leader Kim Jong-il's death in December, the agreement surprised some analysts, who expected his son and successor Kim Jong-un to be under pressure to take a tough line in order to win the support of his army. Others, however, see evidence that the transfer of power is going smoothly.
It's only been 3 months, but the leader and his inner circle are showing a degree of unity and cohesion that has exceeded expectations. The top tier of government is very stable. This has enabled it to be flexible in its decision-making and reach an agreement with the Americans.
In the days before the talks, North Korea staged military exercises and mass rallies and threatened an all-out war against the South. Many analysts saw these events as aimed at consolidating Kim Jong-un's power. Against the backdrop of this saber-rattling, the new deal with America has been welcomed cautiously by China, Russia, Japan and South Korea. Along with the US, these countries are involved in the six-party talks aimed at persuading North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons in return for aid, which broke down in 2009. Stephen Rebay, Press TV, Beijing.